Welcome back to Property Unlocked, the podcast where we cover everything you need to know about property investment, from strategy and structures to the real-life deals that I'm doing with clients. And today we will be covering buying structures. Should you be buying your next property in your personal name or in a trust structure? Now, I've personally done both. I bought my Darwin property in a trust structure and my Queensland property in my personal name, so I'll be running through the pros and cons of both ways to buy property. Let's wind it back and start with the property I bought in Queensland. So I bought a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in Townsville. It's definitely not new. It was built in the 80s. And, I'm fixing something every other week, so clearly not a new property. It's rented out with a yield of 5.21% on the loan amount, which is a higher rental yield, but I have refinanced this property, so it's nowhere near positively geared. And that means that each month it is costing me to hold that property. The rent is not covering my costs. My costs include interest repayments, council rates, insurance, and the bills that are in my inbox what feels like every other week, from blocked toilets to fixing the roof. The benefit to this, however, is that those losses actually reduce my taxable income. So I'm paying less tax. And if you pay tax in Australia, then you know that's a big benefit. Now, buying in your personal name is simple. It's clear. You'll get your pre-approval quickly. And if you're negatively geared like I am, then you're reducing your taxable income. Now, the downside here is that all of the liability sits with you. And there's no flexibility. The income or the loss is yours. And in my case, that property is running at a loss. Now let's touch on my Darwin property that sits within a trust structure. This property is extremely different to what I bought in Townsville. It's only 8 years old. It's renting at a 5.2% yield, and this will be increased next year when the lease expires. And being such a newer property, I don't deal with the headaches of all of these maintenance costs. So all in all, the property is running much closer to cash flow positive. And that is what makes it perfect for a trust structure. With a trust, you can distribute income with more flexibility. If one year I want the income from my Darwin property to flow to me, then I can do that. If the next year it makes more sense from an accounting point of view to send that money to a family member, then I can also do that. With a trust structure, there is also an added layer of legal protection. By not having it in my personal name, I've added a barrier between myself and the property. And that matters more as I build my portfolio or as you take on more risk. But here is the main benefit that you'll see all property investors and all buyer agents really drawn to. When the property in a trust structure is positively geared and the trust becomes self-sufficient, meaning the rental income is more than the outgoings, there are some lenders out there that will actually ignore the debt within the trust structure, meaning it no longer affects your personal borrowing capacity. In other words, you can take on more debt and go and buy more property. And this is where that theory comes from, that if you buy in trust structures, you can purchase unlimited property. Now, that's obviously not true. You still have borrowing capacity, you still need to come up with your deposits, but I've personally just seen my colleague buy 2 properties in 1 month in Craigieburn in Melbourne using trust structures, and he's about to buy his 3rd property in Melbourne. And a year ago, when he didn't have the mortgage broker that was giving him this creative lending, he wasn't able to do any of that. So all of that investment has come from the power of buying in trust structures. Now, I have to be real with you, buying properties in trusts, it's not free. Actually, it's quite costly, and it does push some investors away. So let's talk about those costs. Setting up the trust structure itself is going to cost just shy of $2,000, depending on your accountant and what their rate is. Then you have the annual costs to keep this trust running. The annual trust compliance is going to cost you upwards of $2,000 with your accountant. If they have to get you an external audit, this is over $300. And then we have the ASIC compliance and reporting, which also costs around $500. So that is all up around $3,000 to keep your trust running. So here is the bottom line. If you're looking to buy your very first investment property, you may choose to do this within your personal name. Why? It's simple and it's cheaper. And if your property is going to be negatively geared and you want those personal tax deductions, then it needs to be in your personal name. So the type of property that I would be buying in my personal name will always be an older house, something with more maintenance costs, something with a lower rental yield. This way you're going to be negatively geared and you can get your personal tax benefits. But if you're buying a brand new or renovated, shiny home in an area that's providing a strong rental yield like Darwin, then it makes very good sense to buy that property in a trust structure. This is going to put you in the best position to then go and buy a second investment property as soon as possible. So, should you buy your next property in your personal name or in a trust structure? The answer is it completely depends on your income, your goals, and the property itself. Not just the age of it, but where it is. Personally, I will keep doing both. I've got my property in Queensland in my personal name. Darwin is in a trust structure. My next property will be in Melbourne, and that will also be in my personal name. Why? Because I want to capitalize on being negatively geared and reducing my taxable income. Now, what should you do? Before you go and set up any trust structure, speak to an accountant. If you don't have an accountant, I'm very happy to connect you with my personal accountant. He is based in Melbourne. He's bought multiple properties himself. I didn't tell him I was going to give him a shout out, but if you do reach out, you'll be speaking with my accountant, Van. So make sure you speak to an accountant before you make any decisions on how you're buying your next property. But if you already have figured out how you're going to buy, then reach out to me and we can discuss where you're buying, what you're buying, and if you need any help getting into the market, there will be a link in my bio for you to book in a free call. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed already, do that below and follow along on Instagram, TikTok, and of course on YouTube. Thank you.